Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another DVIC or Data Vault Innovators Community Meetup. Today I have with me James Hartwright and Nols Ebersohn.
Good morning.
G'day guys, how's it going?
Morning. Good, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
It's good. We might do quick intros just in case anyone hasn't met us all before. So my name is Julien Redmond. I'm the General Manager of Certus Insight and I guess the host for these meetups and some of the Data Dialogues podcasts. James, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, James Hartwright. I work for a sister organisation of Certus called Cognition Studio, and I work primarily in the data strategy, data governance, so crossing data lakes, data warehouses, and provisioning of the data through analytics, AI, etc.
And Nols?
Good morning. Nols Ebersohn. I'm a principal architect at Certus Solutions and look at the realities of the necessary supporting architectures to make successful governance and information delivery possible.
And our resident guru on Data Vault.
Yeah.
So guys, we're going to have a chat today for the audience about data ops or data operations. Kind of, I guess, its use cases, the approaches, the pitfalls. Let's start with a definition. James, what is data ops?
Yeah, data ops came from DevOps, and it was the thing around DevOps from the old world of writing big, deep specs and then the developers going away and creating something and then putting it in front of the customer and the customer going, well, not really quite what I thought. But similarly, starting with something like the minimally viable product and then growing it out. So somebody really clever went and said, well, why can't we do that with data? Why can't we be agile in the way that we look at, generate and deliver data and work through what's the best for the customer? So it's applying those agile principles, applying the iterative nature of data and getting to a point where you go, yeah, that I'm happy with that content. I can see what I can see and understand what it is I'm doing, and that is fit for purpose.
Nols, anything to add to that?
Following in those footsteps are a tall order, but here's the fundamental issue that we face, and that is that ability to take a small piece and integrate without requirement of any re-engineering to follow. And so let the data drive the process, that hence data ops. Data drives the process, data drives the actual patterns that present themselves, and let you to seamlessly acquire and integrate things that we know will happen. We know that data extends as far as the amount of things that are captured. And so how do we deal with that in a seamless way, but still allow the business to manage to find it, use it, have reasonable performance? And so from that perspective, the data ops is beyond just some automation and a few patterns. It has a much broader application and implication to teams, to processes, to technologies. So those are the elements that we do need to keep in frame when we have this conversation.
Thanks, guys. So if you understood that, and if you're interested in that, hang around for the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to really kind of talk, I guess, around the benefits and the challenges, maybe even some of the pitfalls, trying to relate it to how it relates to data lakes, data houses, I guess, lake houses, actually, and Data Vault 2, obviously. And I guess how Data Vault 2 can address or help in the space of data ops to really deliver on data science, I guess, and keep the trust, keep the reliability, all of those sorts of things. But before we dive into that, we want to kind of, I guess, work through and just restate what we're doing here with the Data Vault Innovators community. Really, I guess the important thing about what we're doing here is trying to create a community of people who are interested in really good information management practices, to share use cases, to share knowledge, training, ideas, and create that community that really can work with each other to improve everyone's skills. So technical and professional development and support place for conversations and debate, I guess around various topics, and maybe we'll have a debate today around data ops, and really creating, some principles around community, around sharing information and sharing input. So this is the second meetup we've had since we launched Data Vault Innovators Community. The website's live, so we'd encourage everyone to go there. Have a look at some of the content that's been brought across from the DVA conference that was run in early 2020. Some of the new content that's recently been deployed. There was an interview with Dan Lindstad that went live last week, so I'd love people to go there, and you'll see lots of content coming over the next several months. So there'll be some really interesting snippets or presentations from the Worldwide Data Vault Conference. So that was what I talked to Dan about recently in that interview. And so some really interesting stuff. And one in particular that will relate to today's conversation was the presentation by Richard Strange on data science. So that's worth having a look at. And so we'll be doing this meetup today. There'll be a series of pieces of content released over the next couple of weeks. Bit of a pause for Christmas, and in the new year there'll be a whole bunch of new content coming as well, which is all in recording at the moment. So we might jump into some Q&A. All right, so just scrolling down on my list here. I guess let's start with the nuts and bolts. Is Data Vault compatible with Data Ops? What could we learn from each of those two approaches? James, maybe you should start this one off.
Yeah. A definitive yes. You actually look at both of the principles, both of the methods, and you see a ton of commonality. There are, I think, 17 principles in the data ops method, and pretty much every one of them has a parallel in Data Vault. And it starts from the perspective of you're iterating through. As I said earlier, you're starting with what's the most basic thing that I need to generate and build, and building it up in a repeatable way, something that somebody can come and look at, pick up, see what's been done, an end user can, as Nols said, look at the metadata, understand what's going on, but also that once you've deployed it, if you want to upgrade it, repeat it, add something on, that it's reproducible, that it's you can version control very easily. So there's a whole ton of stuff from disciplined agile methodology through to business rules, business keys, and releasing and checking, and trust in that process. That when I went through and tried to go, okay, what are we doing? What do we need to do different? There was very little that we had to do differently in data ops that we'd been always doing within Data Vault.
Yeah, great. And so, Nols, is there maybe an official Data Vault perspective on data ops? Is that something that's sort of come about yet? I know there's lots of discussions going on.
So data ops has been part of the fabric, so to speak, not necessarily called data ops in Data Vault world, but it's been part of the fabric from the get-go. For instance, the accommodation of the data driving changes into your deployments based on the metadata, being able to deal with schema evolution as things occur, or the changes in the structures that occur in your data, and having that stream through without needing any touch. So the metadata driving the actual processes, deployments, really lends itself to it. If you look at what the Data Vault principles do, by identification of those components of information, the components being business keys, relationships, and descriptive details, those patterns really remain consistent across any data that you may ever encounter. So those components being consistent lends itself tremendously to data ops, because now we know exactly how to deal with the different parts or the different components of information, and extending your information set and making it useful, particularly in registering those relationships explicitly, allows us to not only bring the different disparate sets together in due course, but it also captures that intellectual property, that corporate knowledge in the model itself, and therefore does not get lost when a person walks out the door. So the data speaks to the actual connectivity, to the reach, to the relationships that exist in your data. And so data ops really require those elements to be in place to be successful. Otherwise, how do you know how to navigate the data? And so this data-driven component, the fact that the process is data-driven, the content of the data helps to define the process and regulate the process, is usually important for the data ops perspective of continuous integration, continuous deployment, because that's where the other disciplines of it starts to parallel in a significant way, not just at a code or a process level, but at a physical data level.
Yeah, so James, Nols mentioned that it's kind of not necessarily known under this name, and I've heard, and Nols said it just then, the CICD, continuous integration, continuous deployment.
Yeah.
Is that all the same thing, or is it slightly different?
Yeah. CICD is part of any of the DevOps, DataOps, MLOps frameworks. And I'll take that last word I said, framework. All of them run well. You can run DevOps badly, but all of them run really well when you've got a framework. So you've just got ways that this is done. That the introduction of new data, introduction of a new process, as Noel said, a schema extended by new attributes coming in. There are methods by which you look after those, and look, especially in DevOps, there's another little word that's come in the middle of DevOps in recent times, which is sec, so security. And when we're working in Data Vault and when we're working with data in a divisional or an enterprise way, security and safety of data is becoming paramount. Hacking, etc., data accidentally being made available to people who shouldn't really have it. Baking something in that is security and segregation in a framework, in a way that you do your work, just has to become part of our normal way of working. And following a number of those Data Vault principles and the Data Ops principles in your CICD is just, it's almost the dotting I's and crossing T's of anything you do in a release process.
Yeah, great. So like lots of discussion around, frameworks and metadata and, and really like the processes and everything. It was really quite heavy, I guess, on getting the framework right so that you can get the structure right, and the structure will give you speed over time. The other approach, I guess, that's been a little bit looser in the past anyway, is sort of the data lake idea. So, Nols, what's the current view on data vaults and data lake and how they kind of work together?
So data lake is but a storage architecture approach. So it does not necessarily solve all your ills in one fell swoop and so, I have a lake, now everything is fine. So the fundamental premise of what Data Vault brings to the table in establishing those elements that helps you identify what you're looking at, managing the relationships that may exist between that so that it becomes explicit, all those principles remain. So Data Lake is more a technology approach to a general requirement for flexibility in your storage architectures, but it doesn't necessarily solve everything. You still require governance. And so from a perspective that been mentioned by James, you still have governance, you still have security, you still have legislation to comply with. Those elements are still brought to bear, even if you have a storage architecture that's flexible and easy to ingest. The trick here is to be able to produce something that actually allows you to consume. And so to consume is the other part of the equation. Otherwise, you have a white elephant or a paperweight. And so from a consumption perspective, if you don't know what you have, don't have access to what you have, if you do not know how to link or manage those across different platforms, you have a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So James, with data lakes, I mean, obviously things have evolved. As Noel said, it's really an architecture, technology architecture. But then things like Lakehouse have shown up, different approaches, those sorts of things. So what do you see? Because I know you spend a lot of time looking into lakes and how data science can be leveraged on top of that. So dive into lake
Yeah,
house and the
yeah,
data
and
lake.
it is it's I'll reflect back on a presentation I did 2 years ago on data lakes, and at that point I was still seeing some of those, right? We've now got access to all of this data, and it's streaming through, and all of the data scientists can go in and play. But you get swamps, you get that piece of unmanaged processes, a data scientist doing, as a request from the business to build something, to show me some data and build that out. But if it's not maintainable and it's not deemed secure, and there is no archiving methodology or for privacy or anything like that, you get very quickly stuck. Now, thankfully, 2 years on, everybody has realized that no, we do need a level of process and management, and we do need governance. And what's the main reason we need governance and we need metadata? Well, it's because as this data's come into the lake, has come into this repository, and more people are using it, more and more people need to have that shared understanding of what their data is and what the data was a year ago before we had an extension or changed the source system. So all of those things that we were solving with data warehousing in Kimball models and on through to Data Vault, they're effectively now resurfacing and maturing as we're getting into data lakes. And there's a little bit there is this is in my mind there's some technology, but in my mind the lake house is this starter of going, well, that data lake is the place where the raw data goes in, where we can stream it in, but and there are some use cases where we can look directly at that stream, look directly at that source as it's coming through. But more and more people still want that integrated view and need that integrated view across 2, 3, 7 systems, and look at the data quality and look at the referential integrity across those. So that from lake to lake house to warehouse, it's a technology thing at the moment. We're just making it way more accessible. SQL tools coming in and etc. But I don't think anything's really changed. We've still got that organizations merge, bring new systems in, migrate, extend and expand. And we've just got to continue to be good and better than we've ever been at managing that data and presenting both the good and the bad to the business as we see it in the data that's coming in.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're dealing with multiple speeds. So there's like maybe streaming analytics, there's near real-time stuff, for maybe, dashboards and stuff. And then there's, your traditional reporting and deep analysis. And so there's part of it's driving what's the velocity of the analytics requirement. And then also at the same time, maybe use case driven, so a use case might be better suited as speculative out of a lake versus, needs lots of governance and the ability to be audited and reconciled, and therefore out of some sort of conformed layer, which obviously we're saying here is Vault aligns really well. Nols, does that feel right to you?
Yes, there is an additional layer to that, because as you expose this, you still have to record the outcome. And this is the area where it's typically well neglected. And so, yes, we can get the technologies to give us the insights we're after in a better, more flexible way. We can govern and gather them to a similar spot. We can manage those contents and make them accessible. But what about the actual decisions that we've derived from the outcomes? Now, data science projects are typically pretty well suited to all of this because they typically produce propensity to roll out, to a propensity score for churn or a fraud score or any of those type of things. But what about the rest of our business insights, our decisions that we've made? Surely we need to be able to record those and track those. So again, to establish the end-to-end process, the evaluation of was our decision correct? Those elements still need to bring into the overall flow of our information set that we both expose and record. And so those principles remain intact. So whether we have a lake house, whether we have a data warehouse, whether we have just a data lake, we still have those requirements. So it's not an end state. A lake house is not an end state, but a step in enabling the business for their analytical purposes.
So I guess if you're running a vault model in that part of your lake, I guess you've got business vault, right? So that gives you that kind of place to write those answers. So that's kind of what you mean, and
Absolutely.
So I guess, yeah. So as we then step into like analytical models, then again that kind of comes down to use cases where you might be a data scientist doing something very speculative, and it's never going to hit production. It's just you need to go and see if any relationships or correlations or whatever exist. That's your job. But then at some point you need to bring that into the real world and make it reliable and consistent.
Yeah.
And that's where Vault can answer that with Business Vault. So is that how we answer kind of the ML ops stuff, James? I know this is
yeah. I'm glad you picked me. Because it's an area where I've been working in this analytics space of this level of up through the level of maturity to real time for the last 20 years, and again the speed at which we can make a decision and the quality of that decision and the feedback with machine learning is really quite amazing over the last few years. But we've still got the underlying piece that the machine learning models will drive on behavior. So they'll see little interactions and IoT data coming through with trends and values, but there's still this underlying slowly changing content. That if we're looking at IoT, there's still a piece of equipment there of a certain kind that's of a certain age and was installed by a good, bad, or indifferent engineer. Those are still pieces of information that machine learning model should run against. If I'm running it to go, what's the next best proposition product I should give to this consumer? Well, I need to know those underlying things about who's the individual, who are their household, what products do they have or have they had. For that, we need something that sits in that conform zone, the business rule zone, when we've pulled all of that together to be the single view of the customer. And that's got to be provisioned up there in that real-time calculation as the flavor, as the core of what that calculation is going to be based on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think we're getting there. Like it is starting to make sense to me. I think, like Nols, what you're saying about you need to capture the outcome and the decision that was made. Like I think lots of people would capture what the analytics said, but are we talking about actually capturing then what decision was made by the business based on that analytics? Is that how far we're going, and how does that get back into the warehouse?
Absolutely, because how do you know whether you made a good choice or not? How do you try? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so the choices, the decisions we make, those need to be recorded like any other information or data that we have in our landscape. And so instead of leaving it in the experience or the judgment of a person, which then leaves the organization, if those decisions are in fact recorded, then it remains with the organization. So this has been the Achilles heel of the traditional knowledge management systems, because we failed to record those decisions. So as I mentioned before, the ML, the machine learning and analytics world is actually pretty decent with capturing or recording those outcomes. But what about the rest? We have a large group in the organization that makes decisions and decides on outcomes and approaches on a day-to-day basis, and none of that is recorded. So that is the area where the biggest gap exists. And so perhaps that is also one of the big challenges when it comes to machine learning and to analytics, is the absence of those decisions also hamstrings the business as to how far they can take their automation, their decision-making based on machine learning, because those elements are absent. The machines, unfortunately, cannot tell us whether it's a good or bad decision if they don't have the data.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because I think we're like, it feels like really data ops then is about closing the entire loop, having a framework that covers the entire process, not just about getting data into a an analytical model quickly and pushing it out to users, but actually giving you all the steps to do that, and then also capture what was decided and set you up for a better model maybe in the next run, or the ability to audit what decisions you made later on, and make better decisions down the track potentially. So I think hopefully we've kind of helped people understand how Data Vault fits into that picture as well, and gives you a lot of that framework and a lot of that process. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on a lake, but it can be on a lake, especially if people are looking for those sorts of architectures. So that's really good. So so let's assume that the whole audience is convinced that they now need to go and get data ops in place. What challenges do they have when they're trying to stand up data ops? Nols, you can tackle this one first, but I'm going to give James a go as well.
Cool.
First fundamental success factor is you got to get a handle on your metadata management. That is the key enabler for all of this. And it's not just about, oh, I have a repository with metadata. It's actually, how does the metadata drive your patterns, your processes, and essentially have to self-learn, self-heal to adjust to, for instance, new columns flowing through or a new source being added. And so these elements, metadata becomes more and more critical to the overall process. What's the classification so that the actual security is appropriately cascaded automatically? So metadata management is becoming more and more of a key successful element for that to occur. Of course, if we talk about metadata management, you need a platform that helps to capture, manage, and configure that in the appropriate way that can drive those frameworks, those automation patterns, so that it can continue to evolve as such in the necessary speed. Because the challenge with real-time streams is they're real-time. And so when you need to adapt, you do not have months, weeks, or quarters to adapt. You have no time to adapt. You have to adapt as the events occur. So that's the challenge that has brought the whole focus on your data-driven, metadata configured processes that drives your DevOps approaches and mechanisms.
Cool. Okay, so metadata is key. James, what else? What are the other big challenges in getting data ops in place?
Yeah. Well, if you're already, as you should be, using Data Vault methodology, then you're a long way to getting it in. But I think if you're not there and you're starting, it is get the big boulders. The metadata piece a big piece there, but work out your data pipeline and I've been doing a lot of it recently. Put together the playbooks of bringing in a new source, extending a source if it's not dynamic, adding in the business rules, and get that process in. Because once you've got that underlying framework up and running, you can increase your cadence. So you can go from your 2-week sprints to the 1-day sprint in and revolve there. The other piece I would, in terms of the Data Ops Manifesto. So there's a core of what the Data Ops Manifesto is towards that data management, be it a lake, be it a warehouse, whatever. There are a number of pieces in there though that are leaning a lot more towards the ML ops and the build something out, get it up and running, but know that it can be throwaway. That you can stand up a whole environment with all of the data in and run in your little sort of standalone block and run something, and then if it works, get it to deploy. In a data lake or an enterprise data warehouse scenario, that's your ability to completely replicate the warehouse is quite low. But other things like picking those areas. So if you've got a brand new data source, we already know that in both Data Vault and in a well-constructed data lake, you can bring in a new source and you can bring it in isolation and you can link it or hub it into the structure. So you can still follow a number of those things, but make sure that if you're doing the data lake data warehouse scenario and it's going out for enterprise or divisional level views, that you're doing it in a way that still has that rigor, still has the trust in the data. If you're over there in isolation, still within those playbooks have some of those core things, but know that there are a few things that if you're in prototype mode that you can step through them. But I think getting a structure that works for a data services team through to a data pipeline, and something that runs through a more traditional analytics, data science, and an ML ops, where you know that it's going to be deployed up there in real time, getting those core pieces in, that's something that you just need to get down and done and recorded and people following.
And okay, so a couple of things. Obviously, new technologies are always coming along, and there's some of the new cloud warehousing tools that allow you to, copy parts of the warehouse, or or rapid copy or no copy, but still make changes and not mess with your warehouse. Cool stuff. Does that help with getting that stuff done for the sandpit bit, where you want to have that prototyping stuff, and then you can blow that away, and then but you've tested your model out, and then you can start going forward? Does that make sense? Who wants to answer that one? Nols.
I'm happy to go with that one. Yes, there are technologies now in the marketplace that really helps to do that prototyping and getting a production picture without impacting production, and then running a potential change or a potential hypothesis against that, either changing or creating new data, and you can test it before you let it loose on the actual production instances that are out there. And so that is absolutely possible, and so that is a great enabler to do so. So your mileage may vary depending on your vendor, so perhaps you need to have a conversation with your vendor as to what they can or can't support in that type of cloning and or snapshotting capabilities. The one caution I do want to offer is, do not underestimate, though, in your data ops world, the impact and the effort associated to plugging the gaps in those business rules. Yes, we need a mechanism, and yes, your architecture needs to take care of it, and that's fine, but don't be surprised by the volume of those technical debt items that needs to be resolved in your business rule landscape. So keep an eye on those, because those will typically be one of the slowest parts of any DevOps or data ops or operation, because it requires a distinct definition and implementation of those to establish what is considered by the business as credible. So that's just a caution in this landscape.
No, I'd agree. I mean, we've obviously seen plenty of places where the volume of business rules and the complexity of them that needs to be applied just to fill those holes in sources is significant. Yeah. So, James, another thing that I was thinking while you were chatting just before was, what advice do we have around getting started then? If you're talking about all those layers, do you just get started with a basic data vault, start getting a raw vault in place and building up your normal warehouse process? Or is it, if data ops is your end goal and that's the thing you want to achieve quickly, is it still follow the same methodology for deployment?
Yes.
Okay.
I look, it's a hard one, because if you're the first data scientist within an organization, you're actually going to have to build up a lot of those things yourself. But if you're a good, a CDO, a good data manager, and you're growing this out, you need to believe that the things that the data scientists are creating are going to be an integral part of the business running. If we're going to have these things that I remember back in time, where somebody's got, hey, I've grabbed all of this data and I've pulled it all together and I've produced something that looks really, really great. that was okay a few years ago. But if it's not repeatable, if it's not giving you something that you can action, and to our earlier discussion, look at the results of those actions and seeing how well or badly it performed and refine and tune, you might as well just not do it. I mean, there are some exceptions when you're like forecasting through 5, 10, 20 years. But if you're actually trying to do this to increase efficiency or increase revenue, you need to be this thing to be integrated. And if you don't build it as a strong, integrated, secure process, you're going to fail. You're going to have not just business rule technical debt, you're going to have technical debt and issues and penetration tests running on top and going, hey, there's a leak here. You've got to have that as part of the process. But pick it in that orientation, as we do with Data Vault, is start with the first thing that you want, the first thing that you know that you believe is going to solve a business problem. Take the two sources that you need, bring them in that flow, bring them in here's the raw data, here is a bit of data quality, and here is some curation and integration rules, here is some business rules on top to get that normality of that data and some feature sets out the back, and then build on top. But build it so that the results of that model either drop back into the lake or into the warehouse, or process up through into the operational system and get those results. It's step 1, 2, 3. If you try and get to step 3 initially, you're going to fail. You're going to miss all sorts of things, and you're going to have lots of technical debt.
So if you're a standalone data scientist in a new or greenfield sort of site, then essentially, we can spend 80% of their time doing data engineering tasks. Sounds like if you're in a greenfield, then you're up for those 80% data engineering tasks to start with, at least. Whereas if you're in a more mature or a larger site and there are people to get the Vault processes in place, then the data scientist can focus on the models, as long as that data ops kind of process has been embedded, I guess. So we're kind of saying you got to pay the piper, right, Nols? That's your that's your saying. So we've got to get that. We've got to get a structure in and a framework, and that's really what Data Vault provides. If your end goal is data ops.
Yeah. You might get a free lunch, but you're not going to be invited back.
Yeah, fair enough. So, guys, Nols, what have I missed? It's been a pretty good conversation. Is there any other points that we need to make?
We've been pretty comprehensive, but we kind of touched on all of the high points and not really dug into a specific topic to the real technical depth. But that's unfortunately the constraints we have within such a short period of time. The one thing I do want to sort of add to this is there is a often missed component, and this is probably where Data Vault brings the most value. And the understanding, the corporate knowledge that are inherently captured in how the relationships, the linkages between the business keys cascade across your information landscape is often neglected or misunderstood as to the value that brings and it captures. Because if a person leaves knowing how to navigate the landscape, but they never captured that knowledge, that information, that intellectual property, and left it for the rest of the organization, then you lose that. And so this is where the Data Vault does bring something that most of the other approaches neglect. And it helps to capture that intellectual property, that understanding of your information landscape through the relationships as it is exposed in your business processes, in your data. That element is probably one of the gold nuggets that are least explored or least attention being paid to. And I think that's a shame, because that is what really frees up your organization to leverage that data asset in the long term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the most elegant parts of the Data Vault methodology is that integration of information on the business key and then the relationships between that. Because being a non-technical person, I can look at a Data Vault model and often understand what the business process is that exists there, and and I can't do that with a dimensional model, for instance. So, James, any final thoughts from you?
I think it's the if you're entering into your first data lake or your first warehouse, obviously go and look at Data Vault, but look at those data ops principles and processes and start building out your playbooks. If you're already in there, go and have a look at some of the data ops manifesto principles, because I think there is some of the pieces in there that we can still be maybe a little staid in the way that we're doing data warehousing. And I think if you're following Data Vault methodology, there's some very definitely more dynamic business facing, business value add that you can apply if you start thinking in this continuous deployment mode. And if you've got the right sort of tools under your Data Vault processing, which you should have, it just you become way more part of the business rather than, oh yeah, the business has done this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, guys. I think it was a really good dive into data ops. Nols, we are definitely going to dive into Business Vault and tech debt and that lovely subject. We'll do that in the new year. So if you're watching this, then you will be doing meetups. I think the next meetup will be early February, so we'll look forward to that. But for now, anyway, we'd like everyone to head to the Data Vault Innovators community website, see what's on the site, see some of the content and the information that's there. As I said at the start, it's going to continue to grow. So there's lots of stuff coming, and it's the place for everyone to connect. There'll be a marketplace being deployed onto the site soon. So you start seeing some of the vendors that are supporting the community initiative, start seeing some of the things that they offer in different aspects of this. Obviously, there's lots and lots of vendors now really taking a lot of notice of Data Vault and providing technology that specifically helps enable the deployment of Data Vault. So the marketplace will be a great place to go for that. There'll be thought leadership pieces coming, as you can see here, and lots of other digital content, as you can see. So keep an eye on that. There is a community app that we expect to launch early next year. So another thing to keep your eye out for. But for now, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys, for your time this morning, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great day.